In the depths of meditation, after yet another exhausting battle of the Clone Wars, Anakin Skywalker felt something peculiar echoing through the Force. It was as if the universe whispered a name in his ears, a word he had never heard before: Lothal. The young Jedi Knight could not understand the meaning of that call, but he felt it was urgent, as if the Force itself was pleading for him to answer. Without questioning the impulse that guided him, Anakin departed in his personal ship, leaving only a brief message for Obi-Wan about a reconnaissance mission. The journey to that unknown planet seemed endless, and with each parsec traveled, the feeling of urgency only intensified. When he finally landed on the arid and windy surface, Anakin immediately felt there was something extraordinary about that place. Guided by an invisible force, he walked through ancient ruins until he found a long-forgotten Jedi temple. At the center of the structure, there was something that defied all logic and understanding. A shimmering portal, full of voices and echoes of past and future events intertwined. Anakin before the world between worlds. The voices called his name, showing fragments of possibilities, altered destinies and untrodden paths. His heart raced when he saw images of himself transformed into something monstrous, a creature of metal and hatred. Without fully understanding what he was doing, but trusting in the Force, Anakin extended his hand and crossed through the portal, feeling his body being pulled through time and space. When his feet touched hot sand again, Anakin immediately realized something was different. The air tasted different, the light from the twin stars seemed more intense, and there was a strange sense of familiarity in that desert. It was Tatooine, he recognized instantly, but there was something fundamentally altered about the planet of his childhood. Confused and disoriented, he began walking through the dunes, trying to find some reference, some sign of where or when he was. It was then that he spotted in the distance a solitary figure walking. An older man, dressed in worn robes that resembled Jedi attire, observed the young man from afar. When that man turned his face in Anakin's direction, his eyes widened in absolute shock. The voice that came from his lips was at once familiar and strangely aged. "Anakin?" Ben Kenobi was completely paralyzed. Anakin approached slowly, his heart racing, trying to process how his former master had aged decades in a matter of moments. When they finally stood face to face, reality began to impose itself upon him. He had traveled not just through space, but also through time. Ben seemed unable to form words, his eyes examining every detail of Anakin's young face, as if he were seeing a ghost. There was something in the old Jedi's gaze that Anakin had never seen before. A mixture of pain, regret, and something that seemed dangerously close to fear. The emotional distance was palpable, so different from the camaraderie they used to share. After a long silence, Ben finally gestured for him to follow, casting one last worried look in the direction of the young blonde before guiding Anakin through the desert rocks. They walked in silence until they reached a modest cave, hidden among the rock formations. Inside the cave, in the dim light of some luminous devices, the two Jedi finally sat facing each other. Anakin spoke first, explaining about the name whispered by the Force, the temple on Lothal, the mystical portal, and his crossing. Ben listened to everything in silence, his face becoming increasingly somber. When Anakin finished, it was Ben's turn to tell his story, and each word that came from his mouth was like a dagger in the young knight's heart. He spoke about Darth Vader, about Anakin's fall to the dark side, about Padme's death and the birth of his son, about the Empire and the destruction of the Jedi Order. Anakin felt his world crumble upon hearing about the monster he would become, but he also understood something fundamental. The Force had given him an opportunity, a chance to change everything. Ben then mentioned Luke, his son, the boy he had seen in the desert, and Anakin felt an overwhelming need to know him, to see with his own eyes the son he would never know in his own timeline. Ben agreed to take him to the young man, but insisted he be discreet, using the name Ani. The meeting between Anakin and Luke happened the next day, at a neutral point between the Lars farm and Ben's cave, to prevent Owen Lars, Luke's uncle, from recognizing Anakin. The young Skywalker, 15 years old, arrived curious, his blue eyes shining with the same intensity that Anakin remembered seeing in the mirror years ago. Ben made the introductions carefully, presenting Anakin as Ani, a former apprentice of his who was also a Jedi, revealing to Luke for the first time his true nature. The boy was absolutely fascinated, bombarding both with questions about the Force, the Jedi, the Clone Wars, and everything else his eager mind could formulate. Anakin observed his son with a mixture of pride and melancholy, seeing as much of himself as of Padme in that young man full of dreams and determination. When Luke emphatically declared that he also wanted to be a Jedi, Anakin felt the powerful force flowing through the boy and immediately knew this was his purpose there. Without consulting Ben, Anakin asked a question that left the old master speechless. "Do you want to be trained in the way of the Force?" Luke responded with an enthusiasm that lit up the entire desert. But his expression soon became somber when mentioning that his Uncle Owen would never allow such a thing. Anakin then placed his hands on the boy's shoulders and said with a firmness that only a father could have, "Then you will have to be strong and make that decision for yourself. A Jedi does not wait for permission to do what is right." Those words resonated deeply in Luke, and Anakin could see determination growing in his eyes. Ben tried to intervene, worried about the consequences, but Anakin silenced him with a look, and the old Jedi, for reasons he could not fully explain, accepted. Luke departed that afternoon, his mind decided. When Luke arrived at the farm, the confrontation with Owen was exactly as difficult as expected. The uncle exploded in fury, shouting about responsibilities, dangers, and the tragic fate of the Jedi, but Luke remained firm. For the first time in his life, the young Skywalker faced his uncle's authority with absolute conviction, declaring that the decision was made and that he would move to the cave with Ben and Ani. Owen tried to physically stop him, but Aunt Beru intervened, placing her gentle hand on her husband's arm and whispering something that made him retreat. In the following minutes, Luke packed his few belongings and moved to the cave, promising to visit regularly. Training began immediately, and Ben was impressed with Anakin's approach. It was more practical, more intuitive, and surprisingly more patient than he expected. Luke absorbed each lesson like a sponge, his natural connection with the Force flourishing under the tutelage of two Jedi Masters. The months passed, and Luke progressed at an extraordinary speed. Anakin taught him about lightsaber combat, using techniques he himself had perfected during the Clone Wars, while Ben focused on the philosophical and meditative aspects of the Force. But as time advanced, Anakin began to feel the weight of separation from Padme. In the silent nights of the desert, he wondered how long he would remain in that future, whether days, months, or years, or if he would be trapped there forever. He talked about this with Ben, who admitted he had no answers, only the feeling that the Force had a greater plan. The question was temporarily set aside when Luke, eager to see the world beyond Tatooine and hear stories about the rebellion, began to insist on meeting the rebels. After much deliberation, Ben agreed to guide them to a nearby rebel base. The journey to the base happened in an old cargo ship that Ben had kept hidden for emergencies. Obi-Wan took care to ensure that Bail Organa was not present at the base at that time, to prevent the senator from recognizing Anakin. Ben decided to remain on the ship while Anakin and Luke explored the rebel installation. The young Skywalker was absolutely ecstatic, his eyes shining as he saw the starfighters, the rebel soldiers, and the entire operation dedicated to bringing down the Empire. The rebel commanders were intrigued by the young man and his mysterious mentor, but Ben Kenobi's recommendation was enough to guarantee trust. Anakin spent hours talking with rebel pilots, evaluating their tactics and strategies, while Luke absorbed everything around him. It was then that Anakin had an idea that would change everything. He offered to train Luke in flying starfighters, specifically in the X-Wings that the rebellion was beginning to adopt. The commanders, recognizing the boy's natural talent and Ani's obvious expertise, agreed enthusiastically, even providing 2 X-Wings for their use. In the following weeks, Anakin taught Luke everything he knew about piloting, from basic maneuvers to advanced space combat techniques he had developed during the war. The young man was a natural, his reflexes sharpened by the Force, making him an exceptional pilot. When they finally returned to Tatooine piloting the 2 starfighters provided by the rebellion, Luke was radiant with happiness, and Anakin felt a paternal pride he didn't know he was capable of feeling. Luke's Jedi training was advancing rapidly, far beyond what Ben considered possible for someone so young. And then, one day, while they meditated together at the cave entrance, a small blue and white astromech droid appeared, emitting familiar beeps. It was R2-D2. R2-D2 spun his dome frantically upon recognizing Anakin instantly, his beeps becoming increasingly high-pitched and excited as he approached at maximum speed. Unlike C-3PO, whose memory had been completely erased after the fall of the Republic, R2 maintained all his memories absolutely intact, including every precious moment alongside Anakin during the Clone Wars, every battle, every mission, every conversation. The small droid projected a holographic message that made everyone present fall into complete silence. It was Princess Leia Organa of Alderaan, her image flickering slightly but her voice clear and determined despite the obvious fear, desperately asking for the help of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Her trembling but firm voice explained that she possessed absolutely vital information about the Death Star, a superweapon capable of destroying entire planets in a single shot, and that she was being actively pursued by Imperial forces led by Darth Vader himself. Ben observed the message with an extremely grave expression, instinctively knowing that this was the crucial moment the Force had prepared for them. Anakin asked, "Organa? Is she Bail's daughter?" Ben, with a regretful look, said yes. He preferred not to make that revelation to Anakin. Luke was ready to explode with pure excitement and fierce determination, practically jumping in place while vehemently insisting they needed to help immediately. Anakin agreed without hesitation, feeling deeply that this rescue was an essential and fundamental part of the reason he had been brought to this impossible future. The infiltration of the Death Star was anything but simple or straightforward, requiring careful planning and constant improvisation. When they arrived at the Mos Eisley spaceport looking for transport, they found Han Solo, a confident Corellian smuggler, and his Wookiee co-pilot Chewbacca, who owned the Millennium Falcon, a modified YT-1300 freighter that, according to Han, was the fastest ship in the galaxy. After negotiations about the transport price, the group departed toward the Alderaan system, but upon arriving found only debris and the Death Star itself, captured by the station's tractor beam and pulled inside one of the massive hangars. They hid in the Falcon's smuggling compartments while Han complained that this definitely was not part of the deal. The structure was absolutely monstrous when seen up close, a terrifying testament to the practically unlimited power of the Empire and the profoundly distorted vision of order and control that Palpatine had brutally imposed on the entire galaxy. Anakin felt the dark and suffocating presence permeating absolutely every corridor of the station, a darkness that made his blood freeze and his skin crawl, as if evil itself had been molded into steel and concrete. Following the precise coordinates that R2 had skillfully intercepted from Imperial communications, the group located the exact detention cell where Leia was imprisoned in the depths of the security block, with Han and Chewbacca disguising themselves as stormtroopers to facilitate infiltration. When the armored door opened with a hydraulic hiss and Anakin saw the young princess for the first time, his heart almost stopped completely and the world seemed to freeze around him. She had Padmé's eyes, exactly the same deep and penetrating tone, the same indomitable inner fire, the same fierce and unwavering determination that he had loved so deeply and that he still loved with every fiber of his being. For a moment that seemed to stretch for an eternity, he was completely paralyzed, unable to look away, unable to fully process the reality that this was his daughter, the child that Padmé would carry, but that he would never know in his original timeline. Leia, in turn, was visibly confused by the presence of three people where she expected to find only the old Ben Kenobi that her adoptive parents had reverently mentioned on some rare occasions. She immediately assumed command of the situation with natural authority, incisively criticizing the apparently improvised rescue plan and practically taking complete reins of the escape operation with military efficiency. Luke was simultaneously deeply impressed and visibly irritated by the princess's authoritative attitude, while Anakin observed the increasingly tense interactions between the two with a nostalgic smile, recognizing traits of both parents in the young leader. The escape through the labyrinthine corridors of the Death Star was absolutely chaotic, with constant shootouts against squads of stormtroopers, narrow escapes from automated security systems, and moments of panic when it seemed they would be cornered with no possible escape. It was during this frantic and desperate escape that Anakin felt something through the Force that made his blood literally freeze in his veins and his heart race dangerously. It was a dark and powerful presence, simultaneously familiar and completely somber, like looking in a distorted mirror that reflected only the darkest aspects of himself. It was him, Darth Vader. It was the future that Ben had described in painful detail, materialized in physical form and walking through the same corridors. The inevitable encounter happened on a walkway suspended over an apparently bottomless abyss that descended to the station's core, a suitably dramatic location for such a moment. Vader emerged from the shadows like an apparition straight from the worst nightmares, his characteristic mechanical breathing echoing sinisterly through the empty hangar, each inhalation and exhalation a reminder of the terrible price of his choices. His eyes, or rather, the glowing red sensors of his intimidating mask, fixed on Anakin with an intensity that transcended normal understanding, as if he were looking through the layers of reality and time simultaneously. For a long moment charged with unbearable tension, neither of them moved a single muscle, each processing the absolute impossibility of the situation they found themselves in. Then Vader spoke, his voice deeply distorted by the mask but still recognizable at a fundamental level, revealing something completely unexpected and disturbing: total recognition. He perfectly understood the impossible temporal paradox that was occurring before him. "You," said Vader slowly, each word loaded with multiple meaning, "know what must be done. Come with me now. Together we will defeat the Emperor and bring true order to the galaxy. It is your inevitable destiny. It is our destiny." The words were simultaneously a carefully elaborated seduction and a veiled threat, promising power and purpose while implying terrible consequences for refusal. Anakin could feel the attraction of the dark side emanating from Vader in almost physical waves, trying to find cracks in his determination, looking for fear and anger that could be exploited. But he had seen this path to its bitter end, had known his son and understood the true price of such power, and that experience had changed something fundamental in his core. Anakin ignited his blue lightsaber with a characteristic sound that echoed through the hangar, the blade glowing defiantly in the industrial penumbra. "I have already seen where that path leads," he responded with a firmness that surprised even himself, his voice betraying no hesitation. "And I consciously choose something completely different. I choose hope instead of despair, love instead of hatred, light instead of darkness." The battle that followed was fierce, brutal, and strangely intimate, two aspects of the same man separated by decades of conflicting experiences. Vader was incredibly powerful, cybernetically augmented and tempered by years of relentless combat, while for Anakin, there was something in his combat technique that Vader recognized intimately because it was essentially his own technique. Each movement was like looking in a distorted mirror that reflected both what he was and what he could become. Vader, much slower and older, managed to anticipate Anakin's attacks because they were the same movements he would use himself, could predict his defenses because they were the defenses he had developed, creating a lethal dance of mutual prediction. Luke shouted his name desperately from the other side of the hangar, bringing him abruptly back to the present moment and reminding him of what really mattered. Anakin managed to create a crucial opening using a feint that Vader did not expect from himself, allowing Luke, Leia, and R2 to reach the escape ship. He retreated slowly and methodically, keeping Vader at a distance with a series of precise defensive attacks until he managed to jump acrobatically to the hangar where his own ship was waiting with engines already warmed up. When they took off at maximum speed, leaving the massive Death Star behind, Anakin knew with absolute certainty that this would not be the last encounter with his corrupted future self. Back at the Rebel base on Yavin 4, a tropical moon covered with dense jungles where the rebellion had established its temporary headquarters, the stolen Death Star plans were meticulously analyzed by technicians and strategists, and a critical but extremely difficult weakness to exploit was finally identified. Anakin actively participated in the intense planning of the attack, his vast military experience from the Clone Wars proving absolutely invaluable as he contributed tactical insights that the rebels had not considered. When the X-Wing squadron finally took off for the final desperate attack, Anakin and Luke flew side by side in perfect synchrony, their fighters responding like extensions of their own bodies through the Force. The battle over the Death Star's surface was absolutely intense and chaotic, with fighters aggressively pursuing the rebels through the station's narrow trenches while defense towers fired deadly laser bursts. Luke made his final approach through the trench, mentally preparing for the seemingly impossible shot that would destroy the station and save the rebellion. When Vader appeared behind him in his unique advanced fighter, carefully aiming at the young Skywalker to eliminate him. It was Anakin who intervened at the exact moment, doing precisely what Han Solo would have done in the original timeline. He attacked Vader completely by surprise from behind, his laser shots forcing the Dark Lord to swerve abruptly and lose his firing solution, allowing Luke to make the absolutely perfect Force-guided shot. The Death Star exploded in an expansive and devastating fireball that illuminated the surrounding space like a temporary new star, and the surviving Rebel pilots celebrated a victory that seemed completely impossible hours before. When they returned to the base in triumph, physically and emotionally exhausted but deeply triumphant, the three Jedi simultaneously felt a powerful and unmistakable disturbance in the Force, and instinctively knew they needed to return immediately to Tatooine, to Ben's cave where it all began, where a portal was beginning to open again. The shimmering portal pulsed with the same energy that Anakin had felt, a silent but undeniable call. The three Jedi stood in silence before the phenomenon, each processing the meaning of that moment. Anakin looked at Luke and Ben, his eyes revealing a mixture of emotions: pride, sadness, hope, and determination. He knew, deep in his being, that his time there had ended. The mission that the Force had entrusted him with was complete. He had given Luke the necessary tools to become a great Jedi, had changed the course of crucial events, and now needed to return. He approached Luke and placed his hands on the young man's shoulders, looking deeply into his eyes. "Your training has not ended," he said softly. "Ben will complete what we started. Trust him, trust the Force, and trust yourself." Luke had tears in his eyes, without fully understanding the bond he had felt with Ani during those years, but knowing he was losing something precious. "Will we meet again?" he asked with a choked voice. Anakin smiled, a sad but genuine smile. "In the Force, we are always connected," he responded enigmatically. He then turned to Ben, and the two old friends embraced. There was no need for words. Decades of unlived but understood history passed between them in that embrace. Ben finally pulled away and whispered, "Do what is right, my old friend. The Force will be with you." Anakin waved one last time to both and said, "May the Force be with you," then walked toward the portal. As he crossed it, he felt time and space contorting around him once more, and when he emerged on the other side, he was back at the ancient temple. The most surprising thing was realizing that, in his own timeline, not even a minute had passed since his departure. His ship was still exactly where he had left it. The desert dust was still settling around. But Anakin had fundamentally changed. He had spent 4 complete years in the future, for years training his son, fighting alongside him, seeing the consequences of his future choices. He had aged, not just physically but in spirit, gaining a maturity and perspective that would normally take decades to develop. He checked his communications and saw that no one had noticed his absence. He set a direct course for Coruscant, his mind working feverishly. He knew exactly what he needed to do. The Force had shown him the way and given him the tools. There was a new timeline to create, a different future to forge. When he finally arrived at the apartment in Coruscant that he shared with Padme, it was night. He entered silently, expecting to find her sleeping, but she was awake, looking through the window at the infinite air traffic of the planet city. When she turned and saw him, her face revealed deep shock. "Anakin?" she whispered, approaching slowly. Her eyes examined every detail of his face, noticing subtle but unmistakable changes. He was slightly older, some lines around the eyes that weren't there in the morning, but more than that, there was something different in his gaze. It was deeper, wiser, carrying a weight she could not understand. "What happened to you?" she asked, her hand gently touching his face. Anakin covered her hand with his and smiled. "Jedi things?" he responded simply, and then pulled her into a desperate embrace. That night, lying beside Padme while she slept, Anakin elaborated his plan. He had seen the future, known his son, faced the dark version of himself, and knew exactly what had caused all of that. Palpatine, Darth Sidious, the manipulator who had orchestrated everything from the beginning. The Force had given him a second chance, an opportunity to prevent the Empire from even existing, to save the Jedi Order, to protect Padme and his children. There would be no hesitation, no doubts. He knew what he needed to do. The next morning, he left Padme sleeping and went straight to the Chancellor's office. Palpatine received him with his usual smile, offering tea and making casual questions about the Clone Wars. Anakin waited for the right moment, and then, with a speed that surprised even the Sith Lord, leaned over the desk and whispered, "Your empire will never exist, Darth Sidious." What followed was a battle that shook the foundations of the building. Palpatine revealed his true nature, attacking with all the fury of the dark side, but found something unexpected. This was not the Anakin he had carefully manipulated for years. This was not the insecure and emotionally unstable young man who would be easy to corrupt. This was an Anakin who had seen the consequences of his choices, who had been tempered by years of experience he technically had not yet lived, who fought not for power or fear, but for love and purpose. The battle was fierce but decisive. Anakin defeated Palpatine, not killing him but capturing him, using techniques he had learned observing Luke and remembering the teachings he himself had passed to his son in the future. He took the unconscious Sith Lord to the Jedi Council, and there revealed the truth. He did not tell about his journey to the future, only said he had had powerful visions revealing the Chancellor's true identity. The Council investigated, found all the necessary evidence of Palpatine's manipulation of the Clone Wars, and the truth finally came to light. Anakin was promoted to Jedi Master and invited to sit on the Council, everyone impressed with the maturity and wisdom he demonstrated. A change they could not fully explain but clearly recognized. Days later, when Padme came to him with tears in her eyes to reveal she was pregnant, Anakin simply smiled, pulled her into his arms and whispered that everything would be fine, because this time he knew how to protect everything he loved. In the original timeline, in a distant future, Luke Skywalker completed his training with Ben and subsequently with Yoda. When he finally defeated Vader and the Emperor, redeeming his father in the final moments, he saw the Force ghosts, Yoda, Ben Kenobi, and the man he had known as Vader. But when he looked at the restored face of Anakin Skywalker, he saw something that made him understand everything instantly. It was Ani's face, his first master, the mysterious Jedi who had arrived from nowhere and changed his life forever. Luke smiled through tears, finally understanding the complete truth. His friend, his mentor, his master, was also his father.